What is my understanding of ego? That's a good question, because it means lots of different things. It has lots of different potential definitions of the word ego. I mean, the English word ego comes from the Latin word ego, and in Latin, that ancient language, in Latin, ego is the Latin word for I. So literally, ego means I. And it's quite interesting because the word Atman in Sanskrit also literally means I. So when you read the scriptures, if you ever read them in Sanskrit, you'll see the word Atman, which is often translated as self, meaning kind of the essence of who we really are, the true self. Atman, the word Atman is actually used in a variety of different ways, or two main ways. The word Atman can be used to refer to the small, limited sense of being an embodied person, or what in Sanskrit is often called a jiva. The word Atman is often used to mean jiva if you read the Sanskrit texts. For example, in the Bhagavad Gita, the word Atman can be used to represent the limited individual entity. And the word Atman can also be used to refer to the true self, that which is and never changes and is the sole existent reality. Now, strictly speaking, the word ego can be used in the same way. The ego can be thought of as being a false entity, the limited sense of separation, or the ego. So in that sense, the ego would be said to be false or not real, not true. But actually, the ego can be seen to be real. It can be seen to be no different to the true self. It depends from your viewpoint. Now, the complicating thing with the word ego is that there's a psychological meaning to the word ego as well. And a lot of the discourse in spirituality borrows a lot of language from the Western psychological disciplines. So ego can also sometimes mean personality traits. It can mean a sense of being self-centered. Like if someone's egotistical, they might have an unhealthy preoccupation with themselves over other people. So it can represent a kind of imbalanced self-centeredness, an unhealthy self-centeredness as well. Or ego can represent the decision-making apparatus. So, you know, some people say, oh, I need my ego because I need a sense of self from which I can relate to the world. So there are all these different meanings. It can mean limited identity. It can mean personality. It can mean a practical center point from which the body mind can have some kind of reference point, and so which can operate. So it doesn't get confused between its body and somebody else's body. For example, you know, you can see your hand here. You don't think that's someone else's hand, or you don't see someone else's hand, think it's your hand, because there's some basic understanding in the body of what the body is. And in some ways, ego can be seen as the true I, the true self as well. In fact, one of my great, my guru, Ramana Maharishi, he spoke of, when he talked about self-inquiry, sometimes he talked of, you ask the question, who am I? And he made it quite clear that when you're saying, who am I? The quest is, who is the limited ego? What is this limited ego? And he said, when you look for this I, this ego, this limited entity, it disappears. You can't find it. And then what arises in its place is the true self. Now, in some places, he says, when you look for the limited I, when you look for the I, the person that you think you are, the me, the small me, you actually find, he said something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing it because I can't remember the exact quote, that the small I becomes the true self. What you thought was the limited identity is actually Brahman, the true self, the ultimate reality, the absolute. Because all there is the absolute. So what you think of as being the relative is just the absolute. Oh, I don't know if I'm helping at all, Kai. Thanks for your question, though. One last thing I'll say is that often the way I use the word ego in the way I teach is that I use the word ego to mean the limited false identity, the false sense or the false belief in doership, the false belief that I am a limited body-mind entity and I am doing something and I'm able to do something. I'm able to think, I'm able to act. And I call that the ego in the way I teach usually. So in the way I teach, that ego is a complete false entity. It doesn't exist. And when that ego is seen to be illusory, you could say the ego is then ended. It hasn't really ended. It's just that a belief in something that's not real has now lost traction, and you're no longer relating with that false belief at play. And when that happens, the suffering drops away, and there's no ego left. There's no me, and what's left can't really be put into words. But it's sometimes called the absolute, or Brahman, or Atman, or whatever you want to call it. But you can't really talk about that really. It's when the subject-object duality is ceased, and the notion of time kind of collapses as well, and the notion of space collapses in. So actually the ego, even though I've just said it's that small sense of self, when the ego goes, in a way the entire world disappears as well, because the subject-object duality disappears. So all of that subject-object duality, the idea of there being a me here and some other things over there, all of that is the ego actually. And so in that sense, ego, the word ego is synonymous with ignorance. Ignorance meaning the primordial mistake, the basic mistake that is made, the mysterious Maya, the mysterious mistake that's somehow made. We don't quite know why it's been made, but we know it can end. And that's what these teachings really point to.